Welcome to the Humanized Books channel. Today's summary book is based on How to Be Free by Epictetus. What freedom really means. To ask how to be free is not to ask how to escape society, obligation, or difficulty. For Epictetus, freedom has nothing to do with doing whatever one wishes, owning nothing, or avoiding responsibility. Freedom is something far more precise and far more demanding. It is the condition of a person who cannot be compelled, distressed, or internally defeated by anything outside their own mind. This idea carries unusual authority because Epictetus did not arrive at it through comfort or privilege. He was born into slavery. His earliest life was lived under the complete control of another human being. Yet the freedom he teaches is not a reaction against that experience. It is a conclusion drawn from it. He learned, directly and painfully, that a person can be legally enslaved and yet internally free, just as another can be legally free and yet entirely dominated by fear, desire, anger, and opinion. The freedom Epictetus describes is not political and not social. It is ethical and psychological. It begins with a sharp distinction that runs through everything he teaches. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. This distinction is not a suggestion. It is the foundation of a life that cannot be broken by events. What is up to us, according to Epictetus, is the use we make of our own mind. Our judgments, choices, desires, aversions, and responses belong to us. Everything else does not. Our body, our reputation, our possessions, our status, our health, our relationships, and our future all lie outside our control. The mistake most people make is not wanting these things, but tying their happiness to them. Epictetus does not ask us to stop caring about life. He asks us to care correctly. When we confuse what depends on us with what does not, we become vulnerable to frustration and disappointment. We try to control what cannot be controlled, and we neglect the one domain where we are sovereign. Freedom, in the Stoic sense, is self-rule. It is the state of a person whose desires never exceed their power, whose aversions never attach to what they cannot avoid, and whose peace depends only on their own judgment. Such a person may be poor, ill, mocked, or ignored, but they are not defeated. Nothing external can force them to act against their values or disturb their inner order. This vision of freedom requires a radical rethinking of value. Epictetus insists that good and bad do not reside in events, objects, or circumstances. They reside in how we use our mind. Wealth is neither good nor bad. Health is neither good nor bad. Even life and death are not, in themselves, good or bad. What matters is whether we respond to what happens with reason, dignity, and coherence. This claim is often misunderstood as cold or inhuman. In reality, it is an attempt to protect what is most human. When people allow their happiness to depend on chance, approval, or possession, they place their well-being in the hands of forces that do not care about them. Epictetus offers a way to reclaim ownership of one's life. The texts collected in this book come from two sources: the Encheiridion, a compact manual meant to be kept at hand, and selections from the Discourses, records of Epictetus's spoken teaching. The Encheiridion is concise, sharp, and uncompromising. The Discourses expand, argue, and illustrate. Together they form a complete guide to a life of inner freedom. Epictetus speaks in a direct and practical voice. He does not theorize for pleasure. He speaks to students preparing to enter public life, to people facing illness, loss, insult, failure, and death. His philosophy is not meant to be admired. It is meant to be practiced. Throughout this book, you will encounter repeated reminders to examine your impressions, to pause before reacting, to ask what is truly under your control, and to release what is not. These are not techniques. They are habits of thought that must be trained over time. Freedom, as Epictetus understands it, is not achieved once and for all. It is exercised moment by moment. Each situation presents a choice: to surrender your peace to something external or to keep your will aligned with nature and reason. This is not an easy path. It demands discipline, humility, and constant attention. But it offers something rare: a life that cannot be enslaved by fortune, fear, or desire. That is the freedom Epictetus teaches. And that is the freedom this book explores. Next, we will go to the Encheiridion. The Encheiridion is separated in 53 points. Point 1. What is in our control and what is not? Some things are up to us, and some things are not. This is the foundation of freedom. What is up to us includes our judgments, impulses, desires, aversions, and the way we use our impressions. In short, our own mind and its activity belong to us. What is not up to us includes the body, possessions, reputation, power, health, and everything that depends on other people or chance. Epictetus insists that confusion between these two domains is the source of human misery. When we treat what is not ours to control as if it were, we become anxious, resentful, and dependent. When we neglect what is truly ours, we abandon the only place where freedom exists. If you desire only what is within your control, no one can prevent you from getting what you want. If you avoid only what is within your control, no one can force you into what you fear. But if you attach desire or aversion to external things, you make yourself a servant to fortune. Freedom begins with clarity. Point 2. How desire and aversion enslave us. Desire promises fulfillment, but it also creates vulnerability. Aversion promises safety, but it creates fear. Epictetus warns that both become dangerous when directed toward external things. If you desire something outside your control, disappointment is inevitable. If you fear something outside your control, anxiety becomes constant. The problem is not wanting or avoiding, but wanting and avoiding the wrong things. Epictetus advises restraint. Do not immediately eliminate desire, but discipline it. Begin by withdrawing aversion from things that are not up to you. Death, illness, poverty, criticism, and loss are not evils in themselves. Treating them as such gives them power over you. When desire and aversion are aligned only with what depends on your own character and judgment, peace becomes possible. Point 3. How we judge events. People are disturbed not by things themselves, but by the judgments they make about them. This principle shifts responsibility inward without denying reality. An insult is not harmful by nature. It becomes harmful when judged as such. Loss is not automatically tragic. It becomes tragic when interpreted as unbearable or unjust. Between event and suffering stands judgment. Epictetus does not deny pain or difficulty. He insists that meaning is added by the mind. By examining impressions before accepting them, we reclaim control. This is not repression. It is discernment. The mind must be trained to ask, is this within my control or not? And if not, why should it disturb me? Point 4. How to respond to appearances. Appearances present themselves constantly. They arrive uninvited and demand agreement. Epictetus teaches that the disciplined person does not immediately assent. Instead, one should pause and say, you are an appearance, not the thing you claim to be. Then examine it. Ask whether it concerns something within your control or something external. If it concerns what is not up to you, remind yourself that it is nothing to you. This practice, repeated over time, weakens the power of appearances to disturb the mind. Freedom is not the absence of impressions. It is the refusal to be ruled by them. Point 5. Why expectations cause suffering. When you expect people or events to behave according to your wishes, you set yourself up for frustration. Epictetus advises adjusting expectations to reality rather than demanding reality adjust to expectations. If you expect a person never to act selfishly, you will be angry. If you expect life to be fair, you will be bitter. If you expect outcomes to match effort, you will be disappointed. Instead, expect people to act according to their nature and events to unfold beyond your control. Then focus your effort on your own response. This does not make you passive. It makes you realistic. Point 6. How to handle loss. When something you care about is lost, remind yourself that it was never truly yours. Epictetus does not mean this cruelly. He means it precisely. Everything external is given temporarily. When it is taken away, nothing unjust has occurred. You have returned what was entrusted to you. This perspective softens grief without denying affection. You may care deeply, but you do not claim ownership over what cannot be owned. The free person enjoys what is present without demanding permanence. Point 7. The price of freedom. Epictetus makes the cost explicit early. If you want freedom, you must give up certain comforts. You must accept being misunderstood. You must accept that others may not admire your values. You must accept that peace may look like loss to those who measure life by externals. But the reward is sovereignty. No one can force you to think dishonestly. No one can compel you to act against your judgment. No one can take away your character. Freedom is not granted, it is practiced. Point 8. Do not demand that events happen as you wish. Epictetus advises a simple reversal of expectation. Instead of wanting events to happen according to your preferences, train yourself to want them to happen as they do. This does not mean approving of everything that occurs. It means aligning your will with reality rather than fighting it. Resistance to what has already happened is wasted energy. When you accept events as they unfold, you remove the inner conflict that causes suffering. You may still act, improve, or respond, but you no longer argue with reality itself. Freedom begins when desire agrees with necessity. Point 9. How roles should be accepted. Each person is given roles in life that they did not choose: child, citizen, sibling, worker, mortal. Epictetus teaches that these roles should be performed well, without complaint, and without identifying one's worth with them. You cannot choose the role you are assigned, but you can choose how you play it. Excellence lies in performance, not in assignment. If you focus on acting your role honorably, you remain free even when circumstances are limiting. Point 10. Why insults only harm those who accept them. When someone insults you, the harm does not come from their words, but from your judgment that the insult matters. Epictetus encourages distance. Ask yourself whether the insult concerns something within your control. If it concerns character, examine yourself honestly. If it concerns reputation, remember that reputation belongs to others. By refusing to react automatically, you deny others the power to disturb your peace. Point 11. How to respond to loss and attachment. When you kiss your child, your partner, or enjoy a possession, remind yourself that it is mortal and temporary. This reminder is not meant to drain affection, but to protect it from despair. Love without illusion is stronger than love with denial. When loss comes, grief may still arise, but panic does not follow. Attachment becomes slavery only when permanence is demanded. Point 12. Why self-restraint precedes freedom. Epictetus warns that philosophy is not decoration. It must show itself in behavior. Before claiming wisdom, test yourself in small things. Can you restrain desire? Can you tolerate discomfort? Can you remain silent when tempted to boast? Self-restraint is the training ground of freedom. Without it, philosophy is empty talk. Point 13. How to behave at meals and gatherings. Epictetus uses ordinary social situations to teach discipline. Eat without greed. Drink without excess. Speak without domination. Do not draw attention to yourself. Do not insist on preference. Accept what is given with gratitude. Freedom shows itself most clearly in ordinary moments. Point 14. Why sex, reputation, and status require caution. Epictetus warns that pleasures tied to reputation and desire are especially dangerous. They create dependency on approval and circumstance. This does not require abstinence, but awareness. When pleasure threatens self-control, it should be delayed or refused. The free person enjoys without clinging. Point 15. What philosophy demands. Epictetus makes the standard clear. If you want to be a philosopher, you must accept being mocked, misunderstood, and overlooked. Do not seek admiration for wisdom. Seek consistency. Philosophy is proven not in speech, but in endurance, humility, and calm under pressure. Point 16. How to behave when others grieve or complain. When you see someone grieving, Epictetus advises compassion without surrendering your judgment. You may express sympathy, speak kindly, and comfort them, but do not adopt their belief that something terrible has happened. Outward empathy does not require inner agreement. You can care for others without sharing their distress. This preserves your own stability while allowing kindness. Freedom does not make you cold, it makes you steady. Point 17. Why comparison corrupts the soul. Epictetus warns against measuring yourself by others' standards. If you admire someone for wealth, status, or popularity, you have already accepted their values. Once you accept another person's values, you become vulnerable to envy and resentment. You allow their success to diminish your peace. The free person admires character, not circumstance. Comparison based on externals guarantees dissatisfaction. Point 18. How to deal with expectations of honor. If you seek honor, applause, or recognition, you place your well-being in the hands of others. Epictetus urges you to examine whether honor lies within your control. Praise is not yours to command. Reputation is shaped by opinion, not virtue. To depend on it is to live anxiously. Do your work well, and let recognition go where it will. Point 19. Why philosophers should avoid display. Epictetus is especially sharp with those who treat philosophy as performance. Do not announce your principles. Do not dramatize your discipline. If you are thirsty, drink quietly. If you fast, do not complain. If you endure hardship, do not boast. The test of philosophy is silence under pressure. Point 20. How to handle humiliation. When mocked or ignored, remember that insult requires your cooperation. Epictetus reminds you that others act from their own judgments, not from knowledge of your worth. If humiliation touches reputation, it lies outside your control. If it touches character, correct yourself calmly. Humility preserves freedom more reliably than pride. Point 21. Why speech must be disciplined. Epictetus advises restraint in conversation. Avoid gossip, excessive humor, and idle talk about others. Speech reveals values. Careless speech reveals carelessness of mind. Silence, when chosen deliberately, strengthens judgment and attention. Point 22. How to prepare for social situations. Before entering social gatherings, Epictetus advises mental preparation. Expect rudeness, arrogance, interruption, and ignorance. By expecting human behavior to follow human nature, you avoid surprise and anger. Prepared minds remain free under pressure. Point 23. What it means to practice philosophy daily. Epictetus insists that philosophy must be practiced continuously, not admired occasionally. Every impression is a test. Every reaction is training. Every setback is instruction. Do not postpone freedom. Practice it now in small things, repeatedly. Point 24. Why ambition often undermines freedom. Epictetus warns that ambition usually targets things outside our control: influence, status, power, and recognition. When we chase these, we accept dependence on chance and other people's opinions. Ambition itself is not evil, but misplaced ambition enslaves. True ambition, in Stoic terms, aims at excellence of character, which no one can block or take away. When ambition is redirected inward, effort becomes calm rather than anxious. Point 25. How to deal with injustice. When treated unfairly, Epictetus urges restraint. Do not rush to defend reputation or demand restitution if it costs inner peace. Ask first whether the injustice harms your character. If not, then the injury is external. Enduring it with dignity preserves freedom more effectively than retaliation. Justice pursued without rage remains compatible with calm. Point 26. Why we should accept limits. Epictetus reminds us that each person has limits imposed by nature, circumstance, and fate. Resenting these limits wastes energy and distorts judgment. Freedom is not unlimited choice. It is agreement with necessity. When you accept what cannot be changed, you gain clarity about what can be improved. Point 27. How to use philosophy in adversity. Philosophy exists for moments of strain, not ease. Epictetus compares it to athletic training. Preparation matters only when tested. When adversity arises, do not complain that it has come. Recognize it as the occasion to practice patience, courage, and restraint. Without adversity, freedom remains theoretical. Point 28. Why misfortune reveals character. Epictetus argues that difficulties do not harm the person. They reveal the person. Events are neutral. Response reveals judgment. This is why philosophy emphasizes readiness rather than prediction. Freedom shows itself most clearly under pressure. Point 29. How to maintain consistency. Do not shift values to suit convenience. Decide what kind of person you intend to be and act accordingly in both small and large matters. Inconsistency fractures the will. Consistency strengthens it. Freedom requires coherence. Point 30. Why philosophy demands patience. Progress is slow and uneven. Epictetus warns against discouragement. Falling short does not negate training. Do not demand perfection. Demand attention. Each correction strengthens the mind. Point 31. What kind of reputation to accept? If reputation follows virtue, accept it lightly. If it does not, let it go. Seeking admiration turns philosophy into theater. The free person values peace more than praise. Let your life speak quietly. Point 32. How to prepare for difficult situations. Epictetus advises mental rehearsal. Before entering situations where emotions are likely to rise, remind yourself what kind of events may occur and how you intend to respond. Preparation weakens surprise. When you expect difficulty, it loses its power to shock. Freedom grows from readiness, not optimism. Point 33. Why promises to yourself matter more than promises to others. Epictetus cautions against making commitments lightly, especially those that conflict with reason. Breaking promises to others may damage reputation. Breaking promises to yourself damages character. A free person does not overpromise. They act deliberately and consistently. Point 34. How to handle temptation. When temptation arises, Epictetus recommends delay. Do not argue with desire in the moment. Postpone action. Time restores clarity. Many urges fade when not immediately indulged. Freedom often depends on the ability to wait. Point 35. Why restraint is not deprivation. Epictetus rejects the idea that restraint impoverishes life. On the contrary, restraint prevents regret, dependence, and loss of dignity. Pleasure taken without mastery enslaves. Pleasure taken with awareness remains harmless. The goal is not denial, but control. Point 36. How to face fear. Fear arises from imagining loss of externals as unbearable. Epictetus urges examining fear directly. Ask yourself what is truly at stake. If it concerns the body, possessions, or reputation, remind yourself that these are not the self. Fear weakens when stripped of false value. Point 37. Why philosophy must be practiced quietly. Epictetus warns against advertising one's discipline. Philosophy practiced for recognition loses its purpose. Endure hardship without complaint. Let improvement be visible only through calm. Silence protects sincerity. Point 38. How to respond when progress feels invisible. Progress in philosophy is internal and often unnoticed. Epictetus warns against impatience. Do not measure growth by praise or immediate results. Measure it by reduced disturbance and quicker recovery. Freedom grows quietly. Point 39. What it means to accept one's nature. Each person has strengths and limitations. Epictetus advises accepting these without resentment. Trying to be what you are not breeds frustration. Using what you are well leads to peace. Freedom does not require sameness. It requires honesty. Point 40. Why self-respect must replace pride. Epictetus distinguishes self-respect from pride. Pride depends on comparison and recognition. Self-respect depends on alignment with reason. When you act against your own principles to gain approval or advantage, you lose something more valuable than reputation. You lose trust in yourself. Freedom requires the courage to disappoint others rather than betray your judgment. Point 41. How to behave when you are ignored or overlooked. When your efforts go unnoticed, Epictetus advises indifference. Recognition lies outside your control and therefore cannot define success. If you require praise to continue acting well, your virtue is rented, not owned. The free person does not need witnesses to act rightly. Point 42. Why philosophy must guide action, not decorate identity. Epictetus warns against turning philosophy into a label. Calling yourself a Stoic or appearing wise means nothing if behavior remains unchanged. Philosophy is not a costume. It is a discipline. Every action answers the question of whether philosophy is being practiced or merely admired. Point 43. How to endure mockery and misunderstanding. Those who choose discipline will be misunderstood. Epictetus considers this inevitable. Do not defend yourself excessively. Do not argue to convert others. Live quietly and let conduct speak. Mockery harms only those who value the mocker's opinion. Point 44. Why consistency matters more than intensity. Epictetus values steady commitment over dramatic effort. Brief enthusiasm followed by collapse produces no freedom. Small, repeated acts of restraint build a stable character. Sudden extremes often break it. Freedom is built daily, not announced once. Point 45. How to treat success. When things go well, Epictetus advises humility. Success is often influenced by factors beyond control. Enjoy favorable outcomes without attachment. Do not build identity on them. What fortune gives, fortune can remove. Point 46. Why setbacks are part of training. Failure does not disqualify a student of philosophy. Abandonment does. When you fall short, examine the cause calmly and resume practice. Freedom is not fragile, it is patient. Point 47. What it means to live in agreement with nature. To live according to nature means to accept reality as it is and to use reason as your guide within it. You are a rational being in a changing world. Your task is not to control events, but to respond wisely. When judgment aligns with nature, resistance ends. Point 48. How progress in philosophy can be recognized. Epictetus explains that progress is not shown through speech, display, or reputation. It is shown through behavior under pressure. A person who is improving blames no one, praises no one excessively, and does not complain about circumstances. They accept responsibility for their own judgments and reactions. When disturbance appears, they recover more quickly. When insult arises, it loses its sting. These are the signs of real growth. Point 49. Why blame must be abandoned. Blame is incompatible with freedom. Those who blame others believe their well-being depends on external causes. The beginner blames others. The student blames themselves. The wise blame no one. This is not indifference, it is clarity. When you see that events do not control you, blame becomes unnecessary. Point 50. How to speak and act with restraint. Epictetus urges simplicity. Speak only what is necessary. Act only with purpose. Excessive explanation, justification, or defense reveals insecurity. The free person trusts reason enough to act without constant reassurance. Restraint preserves dignity. Point 51. Why philosophy must be lived, not discussed. Those who talk endlessly about Stoic principles but fail to practice them misunderstand the task. Epictetus compares philosophy to digestion. Food must be absorbed to nourish the body. Knowledge must be absorbed to shape character. A philosophy that does not change behavior is decoration. Point 52. What readiness for life requires. The Stoic trains as an athlete trains. Life will test you unexpectedly. Prepare now. Examine impressions. Control desire. Accept loss. Release fear. Readiness is not pessimism. It is realism combined with discipline. Point 53. The final mark of freedom. Epictetus ends with a description, not a command. The free person desires nothing that depends on others. They fear nothing that cannot be avoided. They act in agreement with reason. They accept what happens without resentment. Such a person is unconquerable. Next part of the book is the Discourses that is divided in 9 chapters. Chapter 1. What is in our power? The Discourses begin where the Encheiridion began, but with greater force and detail. Epictetus opens his teaching by returning to the question that decides whether a person will ever be free, what belongs to us, and what does not. This chapter is not an introduction in the gentle sense. It is a confrontation. Epictetus addresses students who want peace, success, respect, and security, but who still place their hopes in things outside themselves. He points out the contradiction immediately. If you want freedom, but you fear losing your job, your health, your reputation, or your relationships, then you are already enslaved. You have handed your peace over to things that can be taken from you at any moment. He explains that nature has drawn a clear boundary. On one side is what is fully ours: judgment, choice, intention, desire, aversion. On the other side is everything else: body, wealth, status, other people, outcomes. The mistake most people make is trying to cross this boundary in the wrong direction. They try to control what is not theirs, and they neglect the one domain they actually govern. Epictetus does not soften the implication. If you complain, flatter, fear, beg, or blame, it is because you have tied your good to something external. You may call this realism, humility, or practicality, but he calls it slavery. A person who fears loss is not free. A person who needs approval is not free. A person who cannot accept events without resentment is not free. He challenges the listener to imagine what true invincibility would look like. It would not require strength, wealth, or influence. It would require that nothing external could compel you to act against your judgment. No threat could force dishonesty. No promise could buy your integrity. No insult could disturb your peace. This, Epictetus insists, is not fantasy. It is training. He compares philosophy to athletic preparation. No one becomes strong by reading about weights. No one becomes free by admiring ideas. Freedom is built by daily practice, examining impressions, correcting false judgments, and refusing to surrender the will to fear or desire. Epictetus anticipates resistance. Students argue that such discipline is impossible in real life. He replies that what they really mean is that they are unwilling to give up their attachments. They want peace without sacrifice. They want freedom without cost. But freedom always has a price. The price is renouncing the demand that life satisfy your preferences. It is accepting that others may act badly, that fortune may turn, and that outcomes may disappoint. What remains, if you hold fast, is sovereignty over yourself. The chapter closes with a sharp reminder. If you want external things to go well, prepare to be disappointed. If you want your will to go well, nothing can stop you. The choice, Epictetus insists, is always yours. Chapter 2. How a person can preserve their character in any situation. In the second chapter, Epictetus turns from definition to application. Having established what is in our power, he now asks a more difficult question. How does a person actually preserve their character when circumstances apply pressure? Knowing the theory is easy. Holding to it when fear, desire, or anger arise is the real test. Epictetus addresses students who want to live well but feel constantly pulled off course by events. A harsh word, a loss, a threat, or a temptation is enough to undo their resolve. He explains that this happens because they have not decided what they are willing to trade their character for. Without that decision, character is always negotiable. Every situation, Epictetus says, presents an offer. The offer may be comfort, approval, safety, pleasure, or advantage. The price is always the same, abandoning reason. People rarely see the transaction clearly. They say, "I had no choice," when in fact they chose what seemed beneficial in the moment. He urges the listener to ask one question before acting. What kind of person will this action make me? Not what will I gain, not what will I avoid, but what will I become? External outcomes pass quickly. Character remains. Epictetus uses ordinary examples. A person insults you. You can respond with anger and feel momentary satisfaction, or you can remain calm and preserve dignity. A temptation promises pleasure. You can indulge and weaken self-command, or resist and strengthen it. In each case, the external result is secondary. The real consequence lies in the state of your will afterward. He emphasizes that no one can damage your character without your cooperation. Others can restrain your body, take your property, or speak badly of you. But only you can agree to act dishonestly, cowardly, or irrationally. This agreement is always voluntary, even when made under pressure. The chapter also addresses social fear. Many people surrender their principles not because of force, but because they want to be liked, admired, or accepted. Epictetus is blunt here. If you value others' approval more than your own judgment, you have already chosen dependence. You have made yourself easy to control. Preserving character requires foresight. Epictetus advises anticipating situations where values may be tested and deciding in advance how you will respond. When the moment arrives, you will not have time to reason from scratch. Habits decide faster than arguments. He compares this to guarding a city. A city that waits until enemies are inside the walls is already lost. Likewise, a person who waits to decide how to live until temptation appears has already surrendered ground. The chapter closes with a reminder that philosophy is not a shield against difficulty, but a guide through it. Life will continue to present losses, insults, and uncertainty. The question is not whether these will occur, but whether you will meet them as a free person or a frightened one. Character, Epictetus insists, is the only possession worth defending at all costs. Everything else could be replaced, lost, or taken. But once you abandon your own judgment, you no longer belong to yourself. Chapter 3. On desire, aversion, and the discipline of wanting. In the third chapter, Epictetus turns to the inner engine of most human suffering, desire and aversion. He does not treat them as emotions to suppress, but as forces that must be trained. Left undisciplined, they pull the mind outward, tying peace to chance. Disciplined, they become instruments of freedom. Epictetus begins by observing that people usually fail not because events overpower them, but because their desires are badly aimed. They want what they cannot guarantee, and they fear what they cannot prevent. As a result, they live in a constant state of tension. Even when things go well, anxiety remains because fortune can always change. He insists that the problem is not desire itself. To be human is to want. The problem is desiring what lies outside the will. When a person desires wealth, status, health, or approval as goods, they make themselves dependent on forces beyond their control. Success becomes fragile. Failure becomes devastating. Aversion follows the same pattern. When people fear poverty, illness, humiliation, or death, they fear what cannot be fully avoided. This fear does not protect them. It only robs them of calm before anything even happens. Epictetus proposes a radical correction. Desire should be redirected entirely toward what depends on us, acting with reason, integrity, courage, and restraint. Aversion should be withdrawn from everything external and applied only to what truly harms us: false judgment, dishonesty, and loss of self-command. This training does not happen instantly. Epictetus advises patience and gradual discipline. At first, one should suspend desire for external things altogether, rather than trying to desire them moderately. It is safer to want less than to want unwisely. He compares this to recovering from illness. A weakened body cannot handle rich food. A weakened mind cannot handle powerful desires. Strength must be rebuilt slowly. Epictetus also addresses the common fear that this discipline will drain life of joy. He rejects this completely. What drains life of joy is anxiety. What dulls pleasure is fear of loss. When desire is placed only where success is guaranteed, satisfaction becomes stable rather than volatile. He reminds students that no one is forced to desire externals. They learn to do so by habit and imitation. That habit can be unlearned. The mind can be retrained to find fulfillment in what it does, not in what it gets. The chapter closes with a warning. If you attempt to study philosophy while secretly reserving certain externals as indispensable, you will eventually betray your principles. Under pressure, the hidden attachment will reveal itself. Freedom, Epictetus concludes, requires honesty about what you are willing to give up. You cannot be free and cling to everything. You must choose where your good truly lies. When desire is disciplined, fear loosens its grip. When fear loosens, the mind stands upright. And when the mind stands upright, nothing external can bend it. Chapter 4. On Progress and the Danger of Self-Deception. In the fourth chapter, Epictetus turns his attention to a subtle but serious obstacle on the philosophical path: the illusion of progress. Many people, he observes, believe they are improving simply because they understand Stoic ideas or can speak about them fluently. This belief is comforting but dangerous. It replaces practice with pride. Epictetus reminds his students that philosophy is not measured by words, memory, or argument, but by behavior under pressure. A person who speaks calmly about adversity but collapses emotionally at the first inconvenience has not progressed, regardless of how much they know. He compares philosophy to craftsmanship. A carpenter is judged by the table they build, not by their ability to describe tools. Likewise, a philosopher is judged by how they live, not by how they talk. Knowledge that does not transform action is inert. This leads Epictetus to challenge the desire for quick results. Students often want reassurance that they are advancing, that their effort is visible, that they are becoming wise. Epictetus warns that this desire itself can become an attachment. Wanting proof of progress is another way of seeking external validation. True progress is often invisible. It appears as a slower reaction to insult, a quieter response to loss, a moment of restraint where previously there was impulse. These changes are internal and easily overlooked, especially by the person experiencing them. Epictetus also addresses self-deception directly. People often excuse their failures by claiming that philosophy is difficult or that circumstances are unusually challenging. He does not deny difficulty, but he rejects excuses. Difficulty is the point. Without resistance, there is nothing to train against. He insists that setbacks are not signs of failure unless they lead to abandonment. Falling short is expected. Refusing to examine why is not. Each failure should be treated as data, not as a verdict. Another danger he identifies is performing philosophy for an audience. When people seek admiration for their restraint or humility, they have already shifted their focus outward. Philosophy becomes another role to play rather than a discipline to live. Epictetus advises returning repeatedly to first principles. Ask yourself what is in your control, examine your desires, test your impressions. These basics never lose relevance. Progress does not mean moving beyond them, but applying them more consistently. The chapter closes with a sobering reminder. No one is harmed by ignorance as much as by the belief that they are already wise. The greatest obstacle to freedom is not lack of knowledge, but refusal to see oneself clearly. Philosophy begins again each day, Epictetus insists, not with confidence but with attention, not with pride but with honesty. Chapter 5. On arguments, logic, and the misuse of reason. In this chapter, Epictetus addresses a common misunderstanding among students of philosophy, the belief that skill in argument equals wisdom. He observes that many people become fascinated with logic, debate, and verbal precision, not as tools for living well, but as sources of pride. Epictetus does not reject logic. He insists it is necessary, but he places it firmly in its proper role. Logic exists to protect judgment, not to decorate intelligence. Its purpose is to prevent us from being misled by false impressions, emotional reasoning, or persuasive but empty arguments. The problem arises when students confuse mastery of argument with mastery of self. They learn how to refute others but remain unable to restrain desire, tolerate insult, or endure loss. In such cases, logic becomes another form of evasion. Epictetus compares this misuse of reason to sharpening weapons without learning when or why to use them. Logical skill without ethical direction can even become dangerous, as it allows a person to justify poor behavior more cleverly. He emphasizes that arguments do not disturb people, judgments do. Therefore, the aim is not to win debates, but to correct one's own thinking. A person who can dismantle another's reasoning but cannot control their own anger has failed at the essential task. The chapter also warns against arguing with people who are not prepared to listen. Philosophy is not conversion by force. When someone clings to their opinions for emotional reasons, logic will not free them. Engaging in such arguments often feeds ego rather than understanding. Epictetus urges students to ask themselves a hard question. Am I learning this to live better or to feel superior? The answer reveals whether reason is being used as a tool or as a shield. True rationality shows itself not in clever speech, but in calm action. When insulted, the rational person remains steady. When threatened, they reason clearly. When tempted, they pause. The chapter closes with a reminder that philosophy is not an intellectual sport. It is preparation for life. Logic is valuable only insofar as it strengthens judgment and protects freedom. To reason well is not to argue constantly. It is to live without contradiction. Chapter 6. On fear, confidence, and what truly makes us afraid. In this chapter, Epictetus turns directly toward fear. Not fear as an abstract emotion, but fear as it appears in daily life. Fear of loss, fear of pain, fear of humiliation, fear of death. He treats fear not as weakness, but as a signal. Fear reveals where a person believes their good resides. Epictetus begins by observing that no one fears what they believe to be harmless. Children are not afraid of masks once they understand what they are. In the same way, adults fear events not because of their nature, but because of the judgments attached to them. Fear always points to mistaken value. If you fear poverty, it is because you believe wealth is good. If you fear illness, it is because you believe the body defines you. If you fear disgrace, it is because you believe reputation is essential. Epictetus insists that fear disappears when false beliefs are corrected. This does not require bravado or suppression. It requires clarity. When you see that what you fear cannot touch your character, the fear weakens on its own. He challenges students who claim to accept Stoic principles but still panic under pressure. Their reaction reveals incomplete understanding. Philosophy has not yet reached the level of conviction. It remains opinion rather than training. Confidence, in Epictetus' sense, does not come from optimism or assurance that things will go well. It comes from knowing that whatever happens, you will meet it with reason. The confident person does not expect safety. They expect themselves. This is why Epictetus places such importance on distinguishing between the body and the will. The body can be injured, restrained, or destroyed. The will cannot be forced without consent. Confusing the two creates terror. Separating them restores steadiness. He offers a powerful reframing of danger. What threatens your body may be serious, but it is not shameful. What threatens your character is shameful, but it cannot be imposed. Fear reverses this order. Philosophy restores it. Epictetus also addresses social fear, which he sees as especially corrosive. Many people fear ridicule more than injustice, rejection more than dishonor. This fear quietly governs decisions, leading people to compromise their values in exchange for belonging. He urges students to ask themselves plainly, whose opinion do I fear and why? If the answer is everyone, then one belongs to no one, including oneself. Freedom requires choosing whose judgment matters. For Epictetus, only reason deserves that authority. The chapter closes with a reminder that fearlessness is not recklessness. The Stoic does not seek danger. But when danger comes, they do not surrender their mind to it. Fear fades when the mind stands firm, and the mind stands firm when it knows what truly belongs to it. Chapter 7. On Use of Impressions and the Discipline of Attention. In this chapter, Epictetus turns to what he considers the most immediate and practical skill in philosophy, the correct use of impressions. Everything that disturbs a person, he argues, begins not with events, but with how those events appear to the mind. Freedom depends on learning to pause at that moment. An impression is the first way something presents itself to us. An insult appears as offensive, a loss appears as tragic, a threat appears as dangerous. These appearances arrive automatically. What does not have to be automatic is our agreement with them. Epictetus emphasizes that impressions are not lies, but neither are they truths. They are proposals. The untrained person accepts them immediately and reacts. The trained person suspends judgment. He urges students to adopt a simple habit. When an impression arises, say to it, "You are only an impression, not the thing itself." This moment of distance creates freedom. It interrupts the chain between perception and reaction. Most people, Epictetus observes, believe they are reacting to reality. In fact, they are reacting to their interpretation of reality. This confusion gives impressions enormous power. Anger, fear, envy, and despair all rely on unexamined assent. The discipline of attention means watching the mind closely, especially in small, ordinary moments. A minor inconvenience, a careless remark, a delay, or a disappointment becomes training material. If the mind can remain steady there, it will be steadier in greater trials. Epictetus warns against waiting for extreme situations to practice philosophy. By then, habits are already formed. A person who explodes at small frustrations will not remain calm under real pressure. Freedom is built incrementally. He also explains why this discipline feels exhausting at first. The mind is accustomed to running on impulse. Attention feels like effort because it is new. Over time, however, the effort decreases. What once required vigilance becomes natural. The chapter addresses a common frustration among students, knowing what is right but failing to act accordingly. Epictetus attributes this gap to weak attention. Knowledge without presence is powerless. The mind must be awake at the moment of choice. He insists that no one is free by accident. Freedom is the result of repeated, deliberate acts of refusal. Refusing to assent too quickly, refusing to exaggerate harm, refusing to surrender judgment. The chapter closes with a quiet but demanding conclusion. Every moment presents an opportunity to practice freedom, not later, not after study is complete. Now, the mind that learns to examine impressions learns to govern itself. And self-government, Epictetus reminds us, is the essence of freedom. Chapter 8. On Freedom, Dependence, and the Illusion of Power. In this chapter, Epictetus directly confronts one of the most common misunderstandings about freedom, the belief that power over others, influence, or independence from rules makes a person free. He dismantles this idea patiently and then replaces it with a far more demanding standard. Epictetus begins by asking a simple question: who is truly free? Is it the person who commands others or the person who cannot be compelled? Most people assume these are the same. He insists they are not. A person who depends on approval, position, wealth, or authority is never free, even if they appear powerful. If losing status terrifies you, you are enslaved to it. If criticism silences you, you are ruled by opinion. If comfort dictates your actions, you are governed by circumstance. True freedom, Epictetus argues, has nothing to do with external independence. It has to do with inner non-compulsion. The free person is one who cannot be forced to act against reason. They may comply outwardly, but inwardly they remain sovereign. He uses striking examples. A ruler who fears rebellion is less free than a prisoner who fears nothing. A wealthy person who panics at loss is poorer than someone who desires nothing. Power over others does not equal power over oneself. Epictetus also addresses dependency in relationships. Many people believe they are acting out of love or loyalty when they are actually acting out of fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of disapproval, fear of being alone. These fears, he insists, are not signs of affection. They are signs of misplaced value. When another person's presence becomes necessary for your peace, you have surrendered your freedom. This does not mean withdrawing from relationships. It means entering them without dependency. You can care deeply without attaching your happiness to another's behavior. Epictetus then turns to the illusion of choice. People often say they are free because no one physically restrains them. But if appetite, habit, anger, or anxiety dictate behavior, restraint already exists. It simply comes from within. The worst form of slavery, he suggests, is the kind that feels voluntary. When people say, "I couldn't help myself," they reveal where their chains lie. Freedom requires discipline. Discipline over desire. Discipline over fear. Discipline over the impulse to seek comfort at the cost of integrity. The chapter closes with a sharp reversal. Freedom is not doing what you want. It is wanting what reason allows. The moment desire exceeds control, freedom collapses. To be free is not to escape all bonds. It is to refuse the wrong ones. Chapter 9. On exile, death, and the ultimate test of freedom. In the final chapter selected for this mini-book, Epictetus brings Stoic freedom to its sharpest edge. He turns to the fears people rarely examine: honestly, exile, loss of home, social exclusion, and death. These are the threats most often used, implicitly or explicitly, to control human behavior. Epictetus asks whether a philosophy that collapses here was ever real to begin with. He begins by questioning why exile is feared. What is exile, really? It is separation from a particular place, community, or way of life. But Epictetus reminds his students that no place belongs to them by nature. Wherever they stand, they still possess their reason, their judgment, and their capacity to act with dignity. If peace depends on location, then peace was never secure. If freedom disappears the moment circumstances change, then it was only comfort disguised as philosophy. Epictetus is careful here. He does not pretend exile is pleasant. He denies only that it is shameful or destructive to character. A person who carries their values within themselves is never homeless. The body may be moved, the will remains. He then turns to death, not dramatically but plainly. Death, he argues, is not an evil. It is a natural event. The terror surrounding it comes entirely from judgment. People imagine death as loss, annihilation, or injustice because they believe life itself is a possession owed to them. Epictetus reframes the issue. Life was given temporarily. Death is its return. Nothing has been taken unfairly. The mistake lies in forgetting the terms of the arrangement. He challenges the listener to consider how often the fear of death governs daily decisions. People lie, flatter, obey unjust commands, and betray their own judgment to avoid risk. In doing so, they surrender the very thing that makes life worth preserving: integrity. Epictetus makes one of his strongest claims here. If a person is willing to do anything to stay alive, then life has already lost its value. Mere survival is not the goal of a rational being. Living well is. This does not mean seeking death or neglecting the body. It means refusing to let fear of death dictate behavior. The Stoic does not rush toward danger, but neither do they retreat from truth because of it. He reminds students that threats only work when we cooperate with them. Someone can threaten exile, pain, or death, but they cannot threaten dishonesty unless we agree to it. The body can be forced. The will cannot. The chapter closes with a calm but uncompromising vision of freedom. The truly free person has already rehearsed loss. They have accepted change. They have made peace with mortality. As a result, nothing can be used against them. When death is no longer terrifying, when exile no longer feels like erasure, when loss no longer dictates action, freedom is complete. This, Epictetus suggests, is not a philosophy for the few. It is the natural state of a mind that knows what belongs to it and what does not. A reflective conclusion. This book returns again and again to a single, demanding idea. Freedom is not given by circumstances, but earned through judgment. Epictetus does not offer escape from difficulty. He offers clarity about where power truly lies. Again and again, he draws the same boundary and asks us to respect it. What belongs to us must be guarded carefully. What does not belong to us must be released without resentment. Across the Encheiridion and the Discourses, freedom is stripped of romance and rebuilt as discipline. It is not the freedom to get what we want, but the freedom to want wisely. Not the freedom to avoid loss, but the freedom to face loss without collapse. Not the freedom of control, but the freedom of non-compulsion. Epictetus shows that most suffering comes not from events, but from confusion about value. When reputation, comfort, or survival are treated as the highest goods, fear becomes constant and integrity negotiable. When character becomes the highest good, fear loosens its grip. The world does not become gentle, but the mind becomes unshakable. This philosophy demands practice, not agreement. It asks for attention in small moments, restraint under pressure, and honesty about attachments. Progress is quiet. There are no visible rewards, but something essential changes. The mind learns to stand on its own. In the end, Epictetus leaves us with no illusions and no excuses. Life will take what it takes. People will do what they do. Bodies will weaken. Fortune will turn. But within all of this, there remains one space that cannot be invaded unless we allow it. To live freely is to live from that space. Thank you for listening. If this audiobook challenged how you think, support the work by subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts below. Comments shape future content. Stay curious, stay aware, and return for deeper explorations. All the best, and take care of yourselves.